Hello, my friends. You know, the one problem with doing the kind of research that I've been doing is that it seems like every answer you find just leads to about 10 more questions. And everything seems interconnected, and it's like the more you dig into a certain topic, the more you realize that has to be revealed about it. The more you realize it's connected to about 3 or 4 other important things that tie in, and it gets a little overwhelming. And I'll give you an example in this video. So, just to foreshadow with this particular rabbit hole, I thought that I'd only be dealing with, internationalist Marxists or socialists who started the International Baccalaureate World Schools, but it turns out that it leads to UNESCO, and it also leads to the Theosophical Society of all places. So I hope you'll watch till the end. Lately, I've been researching this school program called the International Baccalaureate School. And I got into this because on my drive to work, I drive past a local public middle school, taxpayer-funded public middle school, and it's got this big sticker on the side of the building that says IB. It doesn't even say International Baccalaureate. It says IB, like it's a fucking cryptogram. So I look up online IB school, and there's no secret about it, really. It's right out in the open. It's the International Baccalaureate. And I looked into sort of their history. And on their Wikipedia page, it says that the IB's pedagogical philosophy, their schooling philosophy, derives from basically the manifesto written by a woman called Maria Teresa Moret. And Maria Teresa Moret wrote her manifesto, so to speak, called "Do Techniques for Peace Education Exist?" She wrote this at the behest of UNESCO, the UN educational, scientific, cultural organization. I think that's what it is. So she writes this at the behest of the UN, and this manifesto she wrote about techniques for peace education are all about what can be done, how can we brainwash children into a mindset where there will never be any more wars. And she blames war on the existence of national identity. So the conclusion she comes to is that we need to be training children, brainwashing them from a very young age, into seeing themselves as part of the human species rather than part of a nation. She does not want people to see themselves as nationals. She wants them to see themselves as part of one grand human species. And that really everything that children are taught and the ways that they're taught should all reflect this idea that they're not really part of individual nations, that their national identity doesn't matter. So I'm researching her, Maria Teresa Moret, and I start looking into sort of what else she was involved in. And it turns out Moret was involved in sort of a pilot school for this International Baccalaureate program called the International School at or of Geneva in Switzerland. And she was one of the head directors at this International School of Geneva, along with a couple other people. And I always like to look at, who these people's colleagues were to get an idea of who they were and what they were thinking about, the sorts of people that they were hanging around with, the sorts of people that they were working alongside, collaborating with. And Maria Theresa Moret was a very close friend and collaborator with this woman called Elizabeth Rotten. And it's an apt name because this Elizabeth Rotten character was friends with not only this Antifa type guy who was a head director or commander in this German Soviet state that popped up after the communist revolutions in Germany just after World War I. She's friends with this, anarcho-communist type guy. And not only is she friends with him, but she's friends with this other, not just friends, she's a collaborator and a colleague who helped to create this organization called the New Educational Fellowship, which later became the World Educational Fellowship. And she helped to create this fellowship with a woman called Beatrice, I can't remember her last name, but I'll put it up on the screen. Beatrice something. And Elizabeth and Beatrice were collaborating on this new educational fellowship. So obviously they were influenced by the same ideas, working in the same circles. Beatrice was a hardcore theosophist, and she worked with this guy, and his name was George Arundel. And this guy was a pretty famous theosophist who was convinced of the imminent appearance of the Theosophic Messiah figure called the World Teacher. And he spent a lot of his money and resources and time in life setting up institutions that were meant to immanentize the eschaton, so to speak, to bring about the end times that would be ushered in by this messianic theosophic world teacher. So these are the kinds of circles that we're dealing with. She was close friends with this guy who was also a theosophist, and they believed that that their goal was to help bring about a messianic figure in theosophy called the world teacher. It was their responsibility to help bring about this Messiah, this world teacher. And according to a couple quotes given on Wikipedia, this new educational fellowship was the, quote, midwife of UNESCO. And Beatrice was not really an outsider to any of this. She was introducing, I think it said on the page that she introduced H.G. Wells to Carl Jung. She's introducing H.G. Wells to Carl Jung. Very famous figures that she's introducing. She was also working with like Piaget and a couple other very well-known, very highly respected academic figures, intellectual figures, the early 20th century. She's introducing them together. She's setting up these conferences where they all attend. You can get someone like H.G. Wells or Carl Jung to attend your conference, then you're a pretty influential person. And so Beatrice, with her theosophy and her whole eschatological view of bringing about this world teacher, the fact that she's tied so closely with like Elizabeth Rotten and her international school at Geneva, and then what develops later out of this international school at Geneva, which is the International Baccalaureate program. Basically, what we have is UNESCO, and UNESCO were the ones who commissioned Maurette to begin with to create her peace techniques in education manifesto. So we've got UNESCO, we've got the League of Nations, which the League of Nations were the ones who were responsible for creating the original international school at Geneva. So all of these big international political institutions that popped up at the beginning of the 20th century were heavily influenced by Theosophy. and presumably then this end times agenda of wanting to bring about the end times, of wanting to bring about the world teacher. It makes you feel crazy. It makes you feel crazy because you'd like to think that this kind of a thing is confined to these like international baccalaureate world schools or the international school at Geneva. Let the sons and daughters of diplomats and ambassadors, let them get into this crazy shit, but not the wider public. But I think it's a lot farther on the line than that. I think that these ideas have already been sort of slipped in to the normal public school curriculum that our tax dollars are paying for. And the reason I think that is because I read an article, I think it was from about the early 2000s, published in an English publication. And it was about a school in Minnesota that had just instituted this international baccalaureate theosophical curriculum. And the parents basically revolted. They voted against it and decided to remove it from the schools. And so, of course, all of these big-brained academic intellectual types who are running the board of education or whatever in the area were so disappointed at this provincialism, this backwards provincial thinking. But an anonymous member from the school board, of course, had to come out and calm everybody's fears by saying, we can remove the International Baccalaureate program from our schools, but the fact is that our curriculum is already being made to match that. And the only thing we'll lose is the actual prestige of the name. So we're already teaching kids in the way that the IB schools suggest us to teach. So not to worry. The plans are going on ahead as planned, regardless of what these peasants think. So yeah, get your kids out of public schools. Thank you for watching.